The organizers for the kind invitation for me to speak here. I'd like to join other speakers as well in saying that this has been a really educational experience, and I've learned much more, I'm sure, from all of you today than you will learn from the upcoming 10 minutes that I will present some theoretical or some legal background on the subject of contracts and capabilities. I was asked to say something about contractual capacity and provide an alternative framework for a classic conception thereof that is based on a capabilities approach. And I will not go into the theory of that, but to see whether an alternative reading might give some renewed understanding of existing legal concepts that we have that might be helpful to the project today. So I was helped a lot already by being placed at the end of the day, because so much has been said already about legal capacity in general and about consent in the previous two panels, such that I can just very quickly recap what a classic view of contractual capacity really is. So I'm strictly speaking about the capacity to exercise rights independently. I'm not speaking about the ability to hold those rights. So contractual capacity is really the ability to engage in voluntary, legally binding commitments, obligations. So those are contracts. So for instance, or when you go to the store and buy something that is a legally binding contract, or in most cases that's a legally binding contract from which you can derive rights and obligations. And the underlying assumption is one of rationality, and that's the ability to independently judge or pursue your self-interest through contract, as it were. Generally, contract theory seeks to attribute the source of the obligation of a contract to the concept of consent. Much has been said about that already, such that a lack of contractual capacity really says, well, that negates the source of an obligation, that negates consent, such that those who are contractually deemed incapable are unable to engage in binding legal commitments independently. So those are two elements, and often in contract law people refer to the principle of freedom of contract in a normative sense as well, and that's on the lower part of the slide. It says that persons should actually be free to decide whether or not to contract with whom and on what terms. So it's a normative expression of that requirement of consent in contract. Now, what are the problems with a classic reading of contractual capacity and consent, and this emphasis on consent as it were? Now, first of all, as a general note, the concept of consent and its emphasis thereon in contract is quite misleading, because in different rules and different cases and different circumstances, the concept of consent and the concept of freedom as freedom of contract takes on various meanings. So contract law has generally failed to give a very coherent or concise theory about why consent is actually legally binding, why it has this magic effect. And it fails to explain with one concept of consent how that concept works in different rules. But specifically in relation to the project at hand, it gives a formal reading of contractual capacity in an on or off switch. So it's a dichotomy between those who are capable, who are able to consent, who have contractual capacity, and those who are deemed incapable, who cannot engage in those acts. And I believe this dichotomy is, could be, or is problematic, because it disguises the fact that contractual capability is actually a continuum on which all persons occupy various positions. We all, in different circumstances, different sorts of transactions that you might engage in, whether it's buying a pack of milk or whether it's engaging in a very complex financial transaction, for instance a mortgage transaction or otherwise, those contractual capacities that we have in those different moments vary widely And they also vary, excuse me, vary in the different phases that we go through in life. So it's not the case that there's a group of people who is incapable and the other group of people who is capable, but we all go through different phases of contractual capacity. So from these two observations, we could say for this project it might be helpful to identify the specific problems, namely one, that in a formal reading of contractual capacity, we see that this dichotomy of capable and incapable people could be stigmatizing to those who are grouped in, who are structurally and categorically grouped and assumed to be incapable. This also is disadvantageous to them because it precludes them from independently engaging in contractual relationships, and these relationships can actually be very important for their ability generally to pursue and achieve valuable goals that they have in their lives. On the other side, another disadvantage, another problem might be that some persons who are assumed to be structurally capable are actually, in certain circumstances, not so capable. I can just say I had to contract for a phone abonnement in the United States, and I just chose one at some point because it was too complicated for me to figure out which terms over time would be most beneficial to me. So I just thought, well, I'll just pick one. So I didn't feel in that moment particularly capable of judging and understanding what the terms would mean over the course of the contract. So, what is an alternative reading of contractual capacity that we may have? Now, if we look at a different sort of theory, it's called the capabilities theory. This is a theory that focuses on individuals and their characteristics that vary internally and across their external circumstances, such that we emphasize in this theory human diversity, and in a sense say that we are all human beings are and experience over time and in different situations varieties of impairments, dependencies, and needs that may impact our ability to pursue what we find valuable. And so a basic question in this theory is really to ask what people are really able to be and do, and how a society could enhance that substantive freedom for them. And this is where contract law comes in, because what does a capabilities perspective of contract law then require of contract law? Well, first of all, it emphasizes this continuum of ability. It really says, well, if all persons occupy various positions on a continuum of ability to determine and pursue and achieve these goals, then how can contract law rules enhance those abilities for people in different moments, and in relationship to the enforceability of contracts, under which circumstances should contractual rights and obligations actually be regarded enforceable or unenforceable. That just means that they have legally binding effect. Now, if we think about a particular situation that I was asked to comment about, namely exploitative contracts, so contracts that are disadvantageous to people who might have been in vulnerable positions, what do we think contract law should look like? Now, we actually have in contract law many remedies, and I speak of contract law as if it is one law that is universal everywhere, and that's certainly not the case. I'm speaking mostly about various legal systems in the European Union, because that's my background and my expertise. So I'll say that these doctrines exist in these different legal systems, and just say very briefly what they address and what they could contribute to the project as we know it. So instead of focusing on whether somebody is contractually capable or not, some legal doctrines focus on the circumstances of contracting. So they look at the outcomes and the results or the content of the contracts that actually are formed. Now, some legal systems focus on gross disparity of the values that are results from an exchange. Some focus on special weaknesses of one of the contracting parties, and others focus on whether one of the parties consciously took advantage of a weaker position. And some systems require all of them at the same time. Other legal systems just focus on one. I will just give one very quick example of an existing remedy that focuses on weakness. Actually, several doctrines. And those are, for instance, undue influence in English and Irish law, that focuses on disadvantaged parties and their dependence of mind, whether it was undermined in the situation or not, unconscionable bargains, error, threat, fraud, duress, and then the last doctrine, abuse of circumstances. And under that latter doctrine, the forms of weakness that might be relevant are, for instance, a state of economic or otherwise necessity or personal difficulty, dependency, abnormal mental conditions, for instance if you're drunk, or inexperience, lack of education, and so on. And what is relevant to know about these remedies is that they can apply to anyone when they contract. They do not apply to particular groups of people that have been designated incapable in advance, but they look at particular contracts and the situations under which those contracts were formed. I think I had this here already 4 times. So I'll stop there and then see if we have time for questions. So,
Thank you very much indeed. We're now going to hear from Claire about her story, and I think Claire, you were going to have Sarah help you tell your story. So I think you've got some slides. You're just getting sorted out.
I'm Sarah. I'm not the person you're here to listen to. When Claire was deciding to take part in this, she decided that she wanted to do it in a conversational style, so I've been brought in as a prop, maybe a stooge, I don't know, we'll see. And under the topic of capacity to contract, she's going to talk about buying her own home, and you can hear more from her in the throughout the process of this conversation. So, who's that?
That's my little brother, and that's obviously me. When I was younger, at my mom's house.
And where did you grow up?
Well then,
Okay. And how long were you living in your mum's house?
23 years.
23 years. And during the process when you were living there, your mum got sick.
Yeah, the irony is that, I have an intellectual learning disability, but I became home carer, which is kind of weird.
Not really at all, yeah. So you were caring for your mum when she was sick.
Yeah.
You were getting carer's allowance,
Yeah.
you're recognised by the stages of care, all of that. Yeah. And so you were really looking after things in the house where you lived for 23 years for a lot of the period.
Yeah.
And then your mum
Died.
yeah.
Oh, where's that?
Not sure what that is, yeah. And so your mum passed away, your mum died, and the property then, what happened with the property, the home?
She died on a Wednesday. 2 weeks later, my older brother put the house up for sale and went on holidays, and I was left to do it.
And your mum had made a will,
But
but
it wasn't signed, so I went into intestate, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So things kind of snowballed from that.
your mum had planned to do things.
Everything was mine.
Yeah,
The house was mine, everything was mine, but she didn't get a chance to sign it.
what signed, so it didn't have any effect.
No, didn't send it.
Yeah. So the house went up for sale,
Yeah.
and then what happened? How long did it take for it to get sold?
I think it was 3 years.
About 3 years.
Yeah, it was about 3 years.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of back and forward and
Yeah,
legal stuff.
these things can just take a bit of time, can't they? So the house was sold,
Yeah.
and then what happened after that?
I went into transitional housing.
Okay. In terms of then, you had a solicitor for the sale, didn't you?
Yeah, my aunt and my cousin sorted out solicitor from
Yeah.
she sorted out all that sort of stuff.
Okay. So you had a solicitor, and then the house was sold.
Yeah, and then they started talking about what's called.
Okay. So wards of court then, what's wards of court?
Basically, you get an assessment, a psychiatrist assessment, psychologist assessment, and then they checked all your mental ability, and then I was deemed I'm capable of looking after my own affairs.
Okay.
Basically, a lunatic.
Lunatic. In the eyes of the law, you're a lunatic.
Yeah.
Do you know what this building is behind us?
Yeah, the court office.
You ever go, well, that's the High Court.
That's the High Court.
Yeah, you ever go there?
No,
Do you ever meet the President of the High Court?
no, but yet they decide what happens to me. What happens to me, yeah.
Yeah. So you were made a word of court then, and when you were being made a word of court, you said you met a psychiatrist and a psychologist.
Yeah.
Was anyone telling you about word of court and what, you know, was it good or was it bad, or what were
So
people
they
telling you?
look after everything, I wouldn't have to worry about it, but I didn't really know what I was in for.
Okay, so they look after everything, and did they mean the money or what did they mean?
They look after the person, the money, as far as I know.
Okay. And nobody ever explained to you anything else other than that?
No.
Okay, okay. And so how long did it take for you to become a word of court?
I became a word of court 23rd of December 2010.
Great, you have a great number for dates.
Yeah.
So 23rd December, so nice Christmas present.
Yeah. I didn't get told to January, so it was actually.
You didn't get told till January. And how did you find out you were a word of court?
I rang the solicitor that I had at the time.
And what did they say to you?
It's no contact with me now. I have made a word of court, so things just kind of no on that.
So you've been a word of court for about a month now, I told you?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it's fair to say then, you know, things changed a lot for you when you were made a ward of court. Do you recognise this building?
Yeah, that's the high court office.
Yeah,
the
the
ones
court.
that make all the decisions about
Yeah.
you,
And so who works in there?
the president of the court.
Yeah, and then with your case,
My caseworker.
yeah. So things like, you know, were there certain decisions that you had to hand over to them?
Everything, like you're not, like it's mad, like when you think back to it, if you get sick, like a normal person, you just normally go to the doctor, but apparently you have to ring and ask and you have permission to go to your doctor, you're not well, but they take 3 weeks to get back to you, which you could be dead. So it doesn't actually make sense.
Yeah.
And hindsight, and they're not allowed to have a passport, they're not allowed to have anything.
Yeah.
But it kind of didn't work like that with me.
No. It's fair to say you pushed the boundaries a little bit, which is fair enough.
So,
So things like, you said that you're not allowed to have a passport, you're
Yeah.
supposed to have your passport. So if you wanted to go on holidays, what would you have to do?
you'd have to write in and ask permission, and then you'd have to find out, basically tell them everything, what you're doing, who you're with, blah, 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 blah.
So your house has been sold and you've gotten your share of the money, etc. And so you had the money in the bank, but you were awarded court. So could you get at that money?
No,
Could you use
they
it?
had it locked up in phones and everything else that goes with it.
Yeah. Okay. And where were you living then at the time?
Transitional housing,
Yeah.
stayed in Cork Street.
Okay. And essentially that's a service for
People that have drug issues, that are just homeless for drunk and alcohol problems or whatever the reason may be.
people who don't have a home of their own for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had money in the bank. You had a home, money in the bank, and then
But
you
yeah,
lived
it's
in
left
the
home
homes.
unit, it doesn't make sense.
No. And how long were you there?
I was there about a year now.
For a year and a half.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're on the wrong side of the city as well, because you're always telling me that you're the north sider, so I think it says something. In terms of in terms of where you were living, it was difficult for you to get to.
My GP and my family are all over in our claim, so it's just, like if I got sick, I had to go over, it's just not, I wasn't over it, I wasn't happy. And then like the place I was living, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I was just wrecked with it.
Yeah.
So,
So the big thing for you was to buy your own home. That was the goal. Okay. And did you ask that question? Could you buy your own home with your own money?
yeah, we asked, and they said that I couldn't do it, I had to do it step by step, which I had to move out of Cork Street and move into a rented accommodation, but I couldn't be the tenant, I couldn't be the tenant of the sublet, which, like, how do you go to the landlord and go, oh, by the way, you're going to get a check from the High Court, how do you explain that?
So something that you said that to me that really concerned you was that, you were paying for it out of your own money, you're paying your rent out of your own money, but the check is coming every week with the High Court written on it.
Like, how do you explain it to a landlord?
Yeah, and how did that make you feel?
Like, there's no point making it exist, and it doesn't make sense.
So you went through a bit of a battle to try and convince people, decision makers that weren't you, that you could buy your own home.
Yeah.
And you were looking around,
I was.
and all the usual things you do, the stressful things you do when you're buying your own home, you
Yeah.
visited places and you
I
put bids in on places, and eventually you were given permission to buy your own home. Well, you had to
challenged the court on it.
Yeah.
We had a meeting with the board of court, we challenged them on it, and I wanted to stay in board of court, that way I'd be protected,
Mm.
but they wouldn't agree. So I went on the road of getting psychologists, getting psychiatrists. I all agree that I'm well able to look after my own kids with family support and
Yeah.
legal stuff.
So you were reviewed again by psychologists and psychiatrists again.
Mom,
More money, paying for that yourself.
Yeah.
And the agreement was that you could resume your own
I could
affairs.
resume my own affairs on the provision that I get family support, any big issues like I have legal advice, which is great.
Yeah.
So
So you got a letter from the President of the High Court saying?
I didn't get a letter, I got a phone call from the solicitor saying that I get a letter from in the post, and I said no. And then she told me on the 3rd day of August 2012 I got released.
Very good, at least. That's a good way of saying it. So you started the process of applying your own home.
Well, we got mixed views on what money I had when the courts took the fees out, which we didn't know was going to be so expensive.
Yeah.
So we started looking around the houses, and then I hadn't got enough to buy for where I wanted, so I ended up in Dinkers.
Yep. And that's the place you bought.
Yeah,
Then.
yeah,
And this is the place today.
that's it. With my dog.
With your dog in the window.
And Valentine's Day 2013, I got these.
So
No mortgage, no, it's mine outright.
you're able to do it like.
Yeah, and I can come and go for things. I'm not answering it to anybody.
So you got a bad Christmas present in 2010, but you got a good Valentine's Day present in 2013.
Yeah.
And so you're happy there now.
For them.
For now. Good woman, good woman. And so I suppose in the end, you know, you got what you were looking for, which is, you know, your own
I have
home.
my own home, and I'm doing what I want to do. So, like, I'm doing FETAC level 5 in Marine College, and hopefully, if they accept me back for level 6 in September, I'll be going back.
Very good. On to the next challenge.
That's it. Life's a challenge. But I need it. Please read it. Yeah. Thank you.
If I can persuade you not all to storm across to the forecourts and berate the President, which I think is what I'm tempted to do at the moment. Lastly, we've got Cleaner, who doesn't need any introduction because she's organised so much today, and to fill in where the project goes on this aspect.
Okay, so I'll try to keep my comments brief because we've been so annoying you with time today with signs and all sorts. But from the project's perspective, I suppose what we can really see from Claire's story is how substituted versus and supported decision making impacts somebody's life. So she's gone through both processes. And so substituted decision making would be the ward of court process, and the project doesn't believe that this is something anyone should be subjected to, because as I said out earlier on in the values, we think that everyone has the right to legal capacity, but that some people may need support. And as we can see from Claire's presentation, that impacted on every part of her life. It impacted on her wanting to go to the doctor, wanting to visit her family because of where she was living, and things that we wouldn't really even think of. You may think of the big decisions in terms of buying a house, but you wouldn't think of maybe the everyday elements of it. And I suppose we can really learn from her experience then in the other sense, in that we can see what she can, you know, she fought through it. She fought her own battles and pushed ahead. But we can see what you can really achieve with supported decision making, and that it is possible, it can be done, and I suppose this is what we want to achieve. A less drawn out version that we wouldn't subject people to word of courtship in the beginning, but the end goal we'd love to be the same. And I hope that from more stories like that throughout the project, we'll be able to prove that to people, that it is a good way to go and that this is what should be done. So I think we'll try and leave time for questions if we have it. Or
Yes, no, we do. You've all done so well. Thank you very much.